That folded letter was not an ending. It was the last item on a very long list. Adeline Voss had been keeping lists her entire life. Lists of household expenditures. Lists of correspondence requiring replies. Lists of estate staff, their wages, their grievances, their small personal disasters that she quietly managed so that the great machinery of Thornfield Manor continued to turn without interruption. She kept them in a leather-bound notebook that she replaced every January, transferring the ongoing items in her careful handwriting from the old pages to the new ones, as though continuity itself were something that could be maintained through sheer diligence. The letter she folded that morning was not in any notebook. It had no list format. It was 4 pages long and written in a single sitting, and when she sealed it, she did not feel relieved or frightened or sad. She felt the particular quiet of a woman who has finally said what she meant. She left it on his desk, weighted down by the brass compass he kept as an ornament, and had never once used for navigation. She was gone before the first light broke over the eastern ridge. To understand why she left, you would need to understand the dinner. And to understand the dinner, you would need to understand the 9 years that preceded it. Adeline was 22 when she married Mr. Rowan Ashby. She had not been in love with him. This was not unusual. Her family's estate in Wiltshire had been quietly bleeding for a decade before her father finally admitted the extent of the damage, and Rowan Ashby was the son of a man who had made an extraordinary fortune in textiles and was eager, as such men often are, to purchase the weight that old families carry without trying. The arrangement suited everyone involved. Adeline understood this with the clarity of a practical mind. She had no illusions about romance and said so plainly to her mother on the morning of the wedding, and her mother had pressed her hand and said, "You will find your footing." She found it rather quickly, in fact. Thornfield Manor was large and poorly organized, and Rowan had no head for domestic management, nor did he particularly wish to develop one. He was a capable man in other respects, intelligent, politically shrewd, not unkind when he thought of it. But the running of a household bored him in the way that everything practical bored him. Within 3 months, Adeline had reorganized the kitchen accounts, replaced 2 members of staff who had been systematically stealing linens, renegotiated the quarterly arrangement with the farms on the southern boundary, and drafted a new correspondence system for managing invitations and social obligations. Rowan noticed none of this directly. What he noticed was that things ran smoothly. He noticed it the way one notices the absence of a headache, not the health itself, only the relief. She did not resent him for it, not at first. What she resented, gradually and then all at once, was the invisibility. She was present at every dinner he hosted. She seated his guests with care, knowing who could not be placed adjacent to whom, knowing which political alliances were fragile and which social wounds were fresh. She arranged flowers and menus and entertainment. She corresponded with his colleagues' wives, maintaining the warm social fabric that allowed him to move freely through professional circles. She read the farm reports and flagged the concerning ones. She managed the tenants' concerns before they became his problems. And at those dinners, at those long glittering tables, surrounded by people whose comfort she had engineered, Rowan Ashby would sometimes introduce her to a new acquaintance, as though he had only just remembered she existed. "And of course my wife," he would say, gesturing vaguely in her direction. Not her name. Not a word about what she had done to make the evening possible. Just "my wife," the way one might indicate a piece of furniture that had been tastefully chosen. She told herself this was the nature of such marriages. She told herself she had known what she was entering. She did not tell him any of this, because there never seemed to be a moment that was right for it, and then a year had passed, and then 3 years, and then 5. And the longer she waited, the more impossible it became to begin. The night of the dinner, Adeline had spent the better part of 4 days in preparation. The guest of honor was Lord Pemberton, a man of significant influence whose goodwill Rowan had been cultivating for the better part of 2 years. The guest list was delicate. She had placed the Harcastle couple on opposite ends of the table after learning from Mrs. Harcastle's personal lady's maid, through a chain of discreet inquiry that Rowan knew nothing about, that the two were in the midst of a private quarrel over an inheritance. She had ordered the kitchen to omit walnuts from every course, because Lord Pemberton's secretary had mentioned once, offhandedly, that his lordship avoided them, and Adeline had written it in a small notation in her social ledger the same day. She had sourced a particular claret from a vintner in Bristol, because she recalled seeing it on Lord Pemberton's table during a visit the previous autumn, and had taken note. None of this was visible. That was, of course, the point. Good management is invisible. She understood that. She wore her green silk that evening, the one with the ivory trim, because she had worn the burgundy the last time they'd entertained, and she kept track of such things. She came downstairs at precisely the right moment and greeted the first guests in the drawing room with the ease of a woman who had done this 100 times, because she had. She was speaking with Mrs. Pemberton, a quiet, observant woman whom Adeline genuinely liked, when Rowan arrived at her elbow with a man she hadn't met, a textile associate from Manchester whose name she knew from correspondence but whose face she hadn't placed. "Hargrove," Rowan said warmly, "allow me to introduce you." He paused. A brief pause, the kind that would be invisible to anyone not paying attention. "To Marguerite." Adeline did not react, not visibly. She offered Mr. Hargrove her hand and said something gracious and appropriate, and he responded, and the conversation moved forward as conversations do. But her name was not Marguerite. Marguerite was the name of Rowan's first love. He had told her about Marguerite once, in the early months of their marriage, in the brief window when they had still been making attempts at intimacy. A girl he'd known before his father's fortune had changed everything. A girl who had married someone else. He had spoken of her with the kind of careful neutrality that tells you exactly how much something still hurts. He had not said the name in years. Not until tonight, with his hand at Adeline's elbow and 30 guests in the room. Mrs. Pemberton's expression shifted just slightly. She had heard it. Adeline could see the recognition. The small, careful recalibration of a perceptive woman who has just witnessed something private made suddenly public. Adeline smiled. It was a particular kind of smile, not brittle, not wounded. It was the smile of a woman who has just received a piece of information she already suspected and now knows for certain. The smile of a finished question. She held it for exactly the right number of seconds. Then she said, gently, "It's Adeline actually," and moved on to greet the next arriving guest. Rowan corrected himself. He was mortified. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, and he recovered quickly, as capable men do, and the evening continued. The food was perfect. The seating arrangement produced exactly the social alchemy she had intended. Lord Pemberton was charmed. By all observable measures, it was a successful dinner. She sat at the opposite end of the table and ate very little. She listened to the conversation around her and contributed at the right moments, and made Mrs. Hardcastle laugh twice. She was, as she had always been, very good at this, and she thought, "I have been in this house for 9 years and he does not know my name." Not truly. Not the name that belonged to her, the name that was her, not his dead romance's ghost wearing her face and managing his household. She set down her fork. The motion was small, no one noticed it, but it landed in her chest with the finality of a key turning in a lock. She knew, in that moment, that she was leaving, not in anger, not in desperation. With the clean, settled certainty of a woman who has finished a chapter and closed the book. He did not notice she was gone until 9:30 the following morning. This was not cruelty. Rowan Ashby was not a cruel man. He rose early and went directly to his study and worked through breakfast as he often did, and when he rang for coffee and the maid appeared with an expression that did not quite match the routine, he registered it distantly and returned to his papers. It was the letter that stopped him. His name on the envelope, in her handwriting. The brass compass sitting on top. He read it standing up. He read it a second time sitting down, which he did not remember doing. She was not leaving him for another man. She was not making accusations of infidelity or cruelty. She was not asking for anything dramatic. She wrote with the same clear, organized precision with which she managed everything else. And what she wrote was simply this. She had spent 9 years becoming invisible in her own life, and she had allowed it, and she was as responsible for that as he was, and she was choosing now to stop. She wrote that she had loved the house but had never been able to find herself in it. She wrote that she had wanted, at various points, to tell him she was unhappy, but that she had convinced herself, each time, that it wasn't the right moment, that things would improve, that she was asking for something unreasonable. She wrote that she now believed those were the thoughts of a woman who had learned not to want too much, and she was unlearning them. She wrote that she did not hate him. She wrote it plainly, without softening it into something warmer than it was. She did not hate him. She was not certain, at this point, what she felt for him, but it was not hate. She had signed it Adeline, not Marguerite. He read the letter 3 times, and then sat for a long while with his hands flat on the desk, and thought about the fact that he could not, at this moment, name a single thing she had done for herself in the time they'd been married. He thought about the dinner. He thought about the look on Mrs. Pemberton's face. He thought about the green silk dress and the perfect claret, and the arrangement of the table that he had complimented once and then forgotten, the way you forget to thank the ground for being solid beneath your feet. He rang for his cousin James, not for legal counsel, not for his solicitor. He rang for James because James was the only person he knew who might be willing to tell him the truth about himself, and Rowan Ashby, for perhaps the first time in his life, needed someone to do exactly that. James arrived by midday and read the letter without comment and set it on the desk and looked at his cousin with the expression of a man who has been waiting for something and is not surprised it has finally arrived. "Where has she gone?" Rowan asked. "I expect she's gone somewhere she can think," James said. "I'd give her that. I need to find her. Why?" Rowan looked at him. "I mean it sincerely," James said. "Why do you want to find her? What do you intend to say to her when you do?" Rowan had no answer for this. He had spent the morning composing responses in his mind, explanations, apologies, defenses, and all of them had felt hollow before they were finished. The name. God. He had not even realized he'd said it until he saw Adeline's face, and by then the sound of it was already hanging in the air between them, and she had been so composed, so seamlessly gracious, that he had actually thought, that she had moved past it. She hadn't moved past it, she had moved on. "I made her invisible," he said finally. It was not a question. "Yes," James said, "for 9 years near enough. She managed everything. She did, and I never." He stopped. There was something in his throat that he did not have a name for. "She signed the letter with her name, her actual name." James looked at him and said nothing. "I need to understand what I did," Rowan said. "Before I do anything else, I need to understand it." James regarded him for a long moment. "That," he said, "might be the first reasonable thing you've said all day." She had gone to her aunt's house in Bath. Not because she was hiding, but because it was the one place that had always belonged only to her. Her Aunt Millicent, her mother's younger sister, had never married, a fact that the family had long regarded as a quiet failure, and that Adeline had long regarded as a quiet triumph. Millicent Crane had a house of moderate size, an excellent library, a garden she tended with genuine attention, and a habit of saying exactly what she thought without apology. Adeline had adored her since childhood. She arrived with a single trunk and her leather notebook and was greeted at the door by Millicent herself, who looked at her niece's face and said only, "Tea or sherry?" "Tea first," Adeline said. "Sherry later." She stayed 4 days before she wrote to James. She spent those 4 days reading, sleeping later than she had in years, walking in Millicent's garden in the early mornings, and discovering that her own mind, without the constant occupation of someone else's household, was considerably more interesting than she had remembered. She also spent them thinking, with the patience that had been trained into her, about what she actually wanted. This was harder than leaving. Leaving had been simple once she had decided to. Wanting was complicated. She had spent so long wanting only for the smooth functioning of things, for the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved, that the question of what she wanted for herself, her own life, her own particular shape of happiness, felt enormous and slightly unfamiliar, like a language she had once spoken and nearly forgotten. She wrote to James because she trusted him, and because she knew that Rowan would have contacted him, and because she did not want her husband to spend the next weeks doing something impulsive. She wrote asking James to relay a single message. She was well. She was not running away. She would be in contact when she was ready, and she asked that she be given the time to be ready. James's reply came 4 days later. "He's reading," James wrote, "which I consider progress. He asked me last week what you liked. I told him I wasn't entirely sure he deserved to know yet. He took that rather better than I expected." She read that twice and felt something shift in her chest. Not hope exactly, something more cautious than hope. Attention. She had not, in leaving, decided that the marriage was finished. She had decided that she could not continue it, as it. These were different things, and the difference mattered to her. She sat at Millicent's writing desk and thought about Rowan Ashby as he actually was. Not as she had been performing the role of his wife, beside him, but as she had occasionally glimpsed him when he didn't know she was watching. The way he spent an hour with the tenant farmer whose wife had died, simply sitting with him, not because it served any purpose, but because he thought it was the right thing. The way he read to the end of a book even when he disliked it, because he believed in finishing what he started. The way he had looked, on the morning after their wedding, when he had come down to breakfast, and found her already at the table with a notebook full of plans for the house, and he had said, very quietly, "You don't have to do all that," and she had thought he meant she wasn't obligated, when perhaps he had meant he didn't want her to exhaust herself. Perhaps. She didn't know. That was the difficulty. They had spent 9 years in the same house and she did not know. She wrote him a letter. Not the letter she had left on his desk. A different one. Shorter, and less certain, and more honest in the way that uncertainty is more honest than conclusion. I don't know who you are, she wrote. I'm not sure you know who I am. I would like to find out. I don't know if that's possible. But I think it requires that we both begin telling the truth about what we want and what we cannot give, and I would like to try that before I decide anything permanent. If you are willing to try it, write back. Adeline. She sealed it and posted it and went out into Millicent's garden and stood for a while in the early autumn light, which was thin and gold and very clear. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Rowan read it in his study, alone, as he had read everything in the past weeks. The estate accounts she had left perfectly organized. The correspondence she had drafted and filed so thoroughly that the household was still running on the momentum of her systems. The small journal he had found tucked in the drawer of the side table in her sitting room, which contained nothing private, only lists and lists of things she had attended to, that he had never noticed were happening. He had read that journal more carefully than anything he had read in years. He wrote back the same day. I would like to try, he wrote. I don't know how to begin except to say that I have spent 3 weeks learning the shape of what you did here, and I cannot account for how I did not see it. I don't offer that as an excuse. I'm told, by James, who has been uncharacteristically direct, that the fact of my not seeing it is precisely the problem, and that wanting credit for seeing it now is not the same as actually correcting anything. I think he's right. I called you the wrong name. I don't have an adequate explanation. I have an inadequate one. I was nervous about the dinner in a way I did not tell you, because I have also not been in the habit of telling you things. And the name came out of some part of my mind that I'd thought I'd closed off. And I understood in the moment I said it that I had hurt you, and I said nothing because I did not know how to begin that conversation in front of 30 people. This does not justify it. I know that. I would like to begin. I don't know how. I am asking you to tell me how, if you are willing. Rowan he posted it and sat with the silence of the house for a long time. The house was very quiet without her. Not chaotic, her systems held, but quiet in a way that was different from before, a quiet that had texture and weight. He had not realized before that her presence was a sound. He had simply assumed the silence of a house running well, without ever asking who was making it run. He had been thinking a great deal about that. They met in Bath in October. Not at Millicent's house. Adeline had not suggested it, and Rowan had not asked. They met at a hotel sitting room that was neutral ground, a place that belonged to neither of them, which felt appropriate. He arrived first and stood when she entered, and thought, watching her cross the room, that he had been looking at her for 9 years without seeing her. She sat down. She looked well. Better than well. She looked like someone who had been sleeping enough and thinking clearly, and had arrived at some conclusions, none of which she was going to before she was ready. He recognized this quality in her for the first time as a form of strength. You read the ledgers, she said. It was not a question. Yes. And the household notebooks. Yes. All of them? All of them I could find. She looked at him steadily. What did you think? He thought about the answer for a moment before he gave it, because she deserved a considered answer and not a reflexive one. I thought, he said, that I had been living in a house that you built around me, and I had never once asked you if you wanted to be building it. Adeline was quiet for a moment. Something in her expression shifted. Not warmth exactly, but an opening, like a window moved by a slow hand. That's a reasonable summary, she said. I have several conditions, she said, a minute later. If we are to continue, I thought you might. I want to keep my own accounts, not the household accounts. Those I'm willing to continue, if it's understood that I'm doing it because I choose to, not because it's expected. My own personal accounts, my own money. I inherited a modest sum from my grandmother that I've never touched. I want to use it as I see fit without consultation. Of course, he said. I want to be introduced by my name. My full name, if the occasion warrants, or simply Adeline if it doesn't. Not my wife. Not a gesture. Yes, I want you to tell me things, not everything. But the things that matter, what you're worried about, what you're planning, what you're uncertain of. Not because I want to solve your problems, but because I would like to be a person you actually speak to. He met her eyes. I would like that as well, he said. And he meant it. He could hear that he meant it, which was a strange sensation. Honesty as something you could feel in your chest, not just decide on. I don't know if I can promise you that I love you, Adeline said. Her voice was very even. I don't know what I feel for you yet. I would like to find out. That seems like an honest place to start. It's more than I had last month, he said. She looked at him with something that was almost amusement. Considerably less than you had last month, actually. Last month you had a household entirely managed and a wife who said nothing. I had less than I thought I did, he said. What I have now is accurate. She was quiet again. Outside the window, the street was busy with midday traffic, horses and vendors, and the ordinary noise of a city that did not care at all about the conversation happening inside this particular room. I have one more condition, she said. Tell me, if I find, after some time, that this is not workable, that you are unable to change or I am unable to trust, I want your word that you will release me from it. Cleanly, without making it difficult. Rowan looked at his hands on his knees. He thought about what it would mean to give that word and hold it. He thought about the letter she had left on his desk with her name signed at the bottom. You have my word, he said. She nodded once. The nod of a woman who files information carefully and will remember it. Then I suppose, she said, we can try. They had tea, in real cups, in a sitting room that was not theirs, in a city where no one expected anything of either of them. He told her about a problem with the northern tenant arrangement that had been worrying him and had not known how to raise. She listened and then said 3 things, each of which was useful, and then she said, I'm not going to solve everything for you. That's not what this is. I know, he said. I'm learning. She looked at him, and for the first time in 9 years, she saw that he was not finished, not changed, but learning, which is a different thing, and in some ways a more honest one. She picked up her teacup. It was a small gesture, but she noticed it was her choice.